Welcome to 221B Stories, where every story invites you into a world of secrets and surprises. Grab your coffee, stay curious, and share the thrill with fellow mystery lovers. Let's get started. Sherlock Holmes and the Clue That Changed Everything. Chapter 1. The Man Who Was Never There. It began with an absence. Not the absence of a man, for the dead leave their marks upon the world. Grief-stricken families, unpaid debts, forgotten letters tucked between the pages of old books. No, this was something else entirely. This was the absence of existence itself. I had been away from Baker Street for only a day, when I returned to find Holmes in an unusual state of restlessness. He sat in his chair, fingers steepled, eyes fixed on the fireplace, where the embers had long since cooled. He had not rung for Mrs. Hudson, nor had he touched the morning papers. An aberration for a man who devoured the news like a predator, waiting for a sign of weakness in his prey. "Something troubles you, Holmes?" I asked, settling into my chair. He did not look at me. "Tell me, Watson, do you recall a man by the name of Henry Acton?" I frowned. The name was unfamiliar, and yet there was something about it, something intangible, like the faintest echo of a dream one cannot quite place. "I cannot say that I do," I admitted. "Should I?" Holmes exhaled slowly through his nose. "I am no longer certain." The admission was deeply unsettling. Holmes was many things: arrogant, incisive, unrelenting in the pursuit of truth, but never uncertain. "I have been visited, Watson, or at least I believe I have." He rose and crossed the room, retrieving a slip of paper from his desk. It was yellowed and frayed at the edges, as though it had been handled too many times. He handed it to me without a word. The note was brief. "Baker Street, midnight. Urgent. You must remember." No name, no signature. Only the faintest indentation on the bottom corner, as if a seal had once been pressed there and later erased. "When did this arrive?" I asked. "That, Watson, is the crux of the matter. I do not know." I blinked. "Surely Mrs. Hudson," I asked her. "She recalls no messenger, no envelope, nothing left upon my desk. And yet, there it was this morning, as if it had always been here. And then there is this." He strode to the bookshelves, extracting a slim leather-bound volume. The London Gazette. A reliable publication, containing notices of marriages, deaths, bankruptcies, those ordinary affairs that make up the quiet undercurrent of city life. He flipped through the pages with a practised hand, stopping near the middle. "2 days ago," he said, "this article appeared." I leaned in. It was a death notice. Henry Acton of Mayfair passed peacefully at his residence. A devoted philanthropist and scholar. Service to be held at St. Bartholomew's. There was no accompanying obituary, no mention of family or cause of death. A mere footnote in the endless march of time. And yet, Holmes continued, flipping to the next day's edition. "Here is yesterday's paper. The same page, the same columns, but no mention of Henry Acton. The death notice had vanished. I felt the hair on my arms rise. A misprint?" I suggested weakly. Holmes studied me for a long moment. "Turn back to the first paper, Watson." I did. The notice was gone. The page was unchanged. There was no sign of erasure, no missing space where the words had once been. It was as if it had never been there at all. I swallowed. "Holmes, what does this mean?" "It means," he said softly, "that we have a case. A man has died, Watson, and now, it seems, he was never alive to begin with. Before moving to the next chapter, let us know where you are watching from, and if you love stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another incredible story waiting for you." Chapter 2. The Vanishing Trail. Holmes wasted no time. The moment the mystery took form, he was already assembling its pieces, fitting them together in that precise, calculated manner I had so often witnessed, but never fully comprehended. Within minutes, we were descending the stairs of 221B Baker Street, stepping into the cold embrace of a fog-drenched London morning. The gas lamps flickered weakly against the encroaching mist, casting the street in a ghostly pallor. "Where are we going?" I asked, struggling to match Holmes's determined stride. "To verify a paradox, Watson," he replied, "and to see whether reality has yet decided which version of events it prefers." Our first destination was St. Bartholomew's Church, where, if the obituary had been accurate, even if it no longer existed, Henry Acton's funeral should have taken place. I could not shake the uncanny sensation that we were chasing shadows. But if there was any man who could wrest truth from such an enigma, it was Holmes. The churchyard was solemn, though the morning service had long since ended. A few lingering parishioners wandered the cobbled paths, exchanging hushed pleasantries before departing into the city's gloom. Holmes approached the verger, an elderly man with spectacles perched precariously on the bridge of his nose. "Excuse me," Holmes began, his tone polite yet insistent. "I believe there was to be a service here for a man named Henry Acton?" The verger furrowed his brow. "Acton? No, sir, I don't believe we had any such service today." Holmes tilted his head slightly. "Are you quite certain?" "Quite. I handle all the arrangements myself." Holmes gave a faint nod. "Then perhaps you would allow me to peruse your registry. I have reason to believe a mistake has been made." The verger hesitated, then turned toward the church, motioning us inside. "If there was a service scheduled, it would be recorded here," he said, leading us to a modest oak desk tucked into a corner of the nave. The funeral ledger was a thick, worn volume, its pages meticulously inscribed with the names of the departed, their dates of service, and the names of the officiating clergy. The verger flipped to the most recent entries and slid the book toward Holmes. There was no mention of Henry Acton, not yesterday, not the day before, not anywhere. Holmes did not react at first. His eyes swept over the page with the same intensity. He reserved for crime scenes, absorbing every detail, searching for the smallest inconsistency. Then, with a slow exhale, he tapped his finger on the margin, a smudge, barely visible, as if a name had once been written, and later erased. The verger frowned. "That's odd. I don't recall any alterations being made." Holmes cut him off gently. "Thank you. That will be all." With that, he turned on his heel, striding purposefully toward the exit. I followed, my mind reeling. Holmes, that was deliberate. Erasure. But why? Who would go to such lengths to remove a simple record of a man's death? Holmes did not slow his pace. Not just his death, Watson. His entire existence. From St. Bartholomew's, we made our way to Mayfair, where, according to the now absent obituary, Henry Acton had resided. The address given, 18 Welby Street, was unfamiliar to me, but Holmes strode toward it with the certainty of a man following a map imprinted on his mind. Yet when we arrived, we found something impossible. The numbers along the street counted neatly. 16, 17, 19, 18 was missing. Not an empty lot, not a building in disrepair, simply nothing at all. The space between 17 and 19 was unbroken, as if the number 18 had never existed. I felt an unnatural chill. Holmes, we walked the entire length of the street. There is no number 18. Holmes turned his head slightly, studying the space. Do you feel it, Watson? Feel what? He took a slow step forward, then another. The space where something should be. Look closely, not at what is there, but at what is missing. I swallowed, following his gaze. It was a subtle thing, something that gnawed at the edges of comprehension. The row of townhouses was seamless, and yet I could not shake the feeling that there was more space than there should be. The gap was imperceptible, a distortion one could not quantify, but could feel. Someone has removed more than a man, Watson, Holmes murmured. They have removed his home. I stepped back, my pulse quickening. Holmes, this is unnatural. Unnatural? No. Engineered? Most certainly. He turned on his heel, leading us away. But I cast one last glance at the empty space between numbers 17 and 19. For the briefest moment, I thought I saw a shadow where there should be none. As we walked in silence, my mind churned with questions. Who was Henry Acton? Why had he been erased so thoroughly? And, perhaps most troubling, how had we come to know of him at all? Holmes broke the silence. Tell me, Watson, how did we first learn of Acton's disappearance? I frowned. The obituary, or rather, the lack of one. Indeed, and tell me, where is that newspaper now? I reached into my coat, withdrawing the folded pages of the London Gazette. Or rather, what should have been the Gazette? The paper was blank. I stopped walking. Holmes! My voice was barely above a whisper. The article! The entire page! It's gone. Holmes took the paper from my hands, unfolding it carefully. Every word, every column, every line of ink had vanished, as if the page had never been printed at all. And yet, the edges were still smudged where I had touched them. Watson swallowed hard. This is beyond reason, Holmes. Holmes studied the blank page for a long moment before slipping it into his coat pocket. It is beyond conventional reason, perhaps, but I assure you, Watson, there is an explanation. Then what do we do next? I asked. Holmes's gaze lifted to the mist-choked skyline. We find someone who remembers Henry Acton. His tone was steady, but I caught the flicker of uncertainty in his expression, something I had rarely seen in all our years together. Because we both knew the truth, though neither of us dared to speak it aloud. If someone could erase a man from history, what might they do to those who seek to remember him? Chapter 3. The Woman Who Forgot. London's fog thickened as we made our way through the winding streets, the gas lamps glowing like weary sentinels in the gloom. Holmes remained silent, his gaze distant, his mind undoubtedly racing ahead of the mystery, searching for a pattern within the impossible. At last I spoke. If every trace of Henry Acton has been erased, how do we find someone who remembers him? Holmes barely glanced at me. By seeking those whom the erasure has failed to fully consume. He quickened his pace. I struggled to keep up. Where are we going? To the one person whose memory should remain intact, Holmes replied, his housekeeper. We arrived at New Cavendish Street, a quieter lane lined with respectable but unremarkable homes. Holmes had procured the address through methods he had not explained, and I had not asked, though I could only assume that, before the name Henry Acton had begun to fade from existence, my friend had committed crucial details to memory. We stopped before a modest townhouse, its windows dark, its door bearing the polished brass numbers 32A. Holmes rapped sharply. A moment later, the door opened. A woman in her middle years, dressed in a simple but tidy gown, peered at us with wary eyes. There was something off about her gaze, unfocused, as if she were only half present in the world. Holmes removed his hat. "Mrs. Fenton?" She blinked. "Yes? May I help you?" Holmes stepped forward. "We are here regarding your employer, Henry Acton." A flicker of confusion passed across her face. I beg your pardon." "Henry Acton," Holmes repeated. "Your employer. May we come in?" Mrs. Fenton's brow creased in distress. "Sir, I don't think I know the gentleman you're referring to." Watson and I exchanged glances. Holmes did not falter. "Think carefully," he urged. "You kept house for Mr. Acton, a residence in Mayfair, Welby Street." The woman inhaled sharply, pressing a hand to her temple. "Mayfair. She swayed. I stepped forward, steadying her by the arm. "Perhaps you should sit down." Yes, forgive me, I feel quite strange." She led us inside. The sitting room was sparse but well kept, the air thick with the scent of old lavender. Holmes remained standing as she lowered herself into a chair, her breath coming unevenly. "I don't understand," she murmured. "I feel as though I should know the name, and yet—" She shook her head. "It's like grasping at smoke." Holmes's gaze sharpened. "Tell me, Mrs. Fenton, do you ever find yourself forgetting things? Details that once seemed clear?" She swallowed hard. "Lately, yes. It has been troubling me. Some days I wake and feel that something has changed, though I cannot say what." A pause. Then, hesitantly, "Tell me, sir, do I have another employer?" The question sent a chill down my spine. Holmes folded his arms. "What makes you ask?" She hesitated, hands twisting in her lap. "There are moments where I feel I should be somewhere else, that I should be working. But I cannot recall for whom. I find myself preparing tea for no one, setting out clothes that do not exist. And when I try to recall, it's as if my thoughts slip through my fingers." A silence stretched between us. Holmes finally spoke, his voice calm. "Mrs. Fenton, I believe you were employed by Henry Acton. I believe he lived at 18 Welby Street." She winced, as if the name had struck her physically. I don't—" But then her expression shifted. A tremor passed through her. Her breathing hitched. "Welby Street," she whispered. "Welby Street!" Something cracked. A barrier. A dam holding back an ocean of forgotten memories. Her hand flew to her mouth. She gasped. I was there. Holmes leaned forward. Yes, what do you remember? Her fingers trembled against her lips. The house. But it wasn't there. My pulse pounded in my ears. Mrs. Fenton, please, explain what you mean. Her eyes darted between us, uncertainty warring with terror. I remember travelling there. I remember standing before the door. But when I reached for the handle, there was nothing, just air, as though the house had been taken away. A sharp breath left my lungs. I turned to Holmes, expecting to see triumph at having found a witness. But his expression was unreadable. He studied her with an intensity that unsettled even me. Mrs. Fenton, he said very carefully. Who else was in that house with you? She flinched. Her nails dug into her palms. I don't know. Try. Her breath shuddered. I remember someone standing in the doorway, a figure shadowed against the gaslight. But their face, I cannot recall their face. I exhaled, shaking my head. This is impossible. Holmes did not answer. He turned to Mrs. Fenton, his voice firm. You are not mad. What you remember is real. She let out a strangled breath. Then why does it feel like a dream? Holmes studied her a moment longer before withdrawing a small card from his pocket. Mrs. Fenton, should you recall anything else, anything at all, you will contact me at once. Her fingers closed around the card. Yes, of course. Holmes tipped his hat. You have been most helpful. He turned sharply, striding toward the door. I followed, my mind still struggling to accept what I had just heard. As we stepped outside into the cold night, I turned to Holmes. This is unnatural, Holmes. This goes beyond deduction. He said nothing at first. Then, does it? I stared at him. Holmes turned his gaze toward the sky, where the fog curled like grasping fingers around the gas lamps. His voice, when he spoke again, was quiet. There is always a logical explanation, Watson, even for the impossible. His tone was firm, assured, but I could not ignore the unease in his eyes. Something had shaken him, and that was more terrifying than anything. Chapter 4. The Name That Disappears. The fog had thickened by the time we stepped back onto the street, its cold fingers curling around lamplight, swallowing the city in a damp, endless shroud. Holmes strode ahead, his silhouette cutting through the mist with a purposeful stride. But there was something different now, an urgency that had not been there before. I hurried to his side. Holmes, what do you make of it? Mrs. Fenton's recollections, if they can even be called that, defy all reason. Holmes's voice was quiet but unwavering. Not all reason, Watson. Only the kind we have thus far accepted. I hesitated, unsettled by his tone. You are suggesting that her memories were tampered with? Holmes stopped abruptly. He turned to face me, his gaze sharp. Not only her memories, reality itself. A chill unrelated to the night air ran down my spine. He resumed walking, and I followed, my thoughts in turmoil. How could a house, an entire house, vanish from existence? How could a man's name be erased, not only from documents but from the minds of those who knew him? It was madness. And yet we had seen it. We must act swiftly, Holmes muttered. Why? He shot me a glance. Because if Henry Acton has already been erased, what makes you think we shall be spared? The thought struck me like a blow. Holmes was right. The very fact that we remembered Acton meant that whoever, or whatever, was behind this had not yet completed their work, which meant that we were next. We turned onto Fleet Street, the hum of the city muffled beneath the oppressive fog. Holmes hailed a cab, giving the driver an address that meant nothing to me. Somerset House. "The Government Records Office?" I asked as we climbed inside. Holmes nodded. If Acton's name ever existed on official documents, it would have passed through Somerset House. If it has vanished, then we will know that this is no mere deception, but a systematic erasure. The ride was silent, save for the rhythmic clatter of hooves against cobblestone. Holmes sat with his fingers steepled beneath his chin, his gaze unreadable. I found my own thoughts racing in unwanted directions. What if we arrived to find that no clerk remembered Acton? That no records had ever existed? What if, at this very moment, something was reaching into the depths of history, stripping him from the past as easily as one removes ink from a ledger? I shuddered and pulled my coat tighter. The cab jerked to a stop. We had arrived. Somerset House loomed before us, its grand facade barely visible through the thick mist. We entered swiftly, moving past clerks and archivists who paid us little heed. Holmes approached a bespectacled man seated behind a desk, piled high with ledgers. "We require access to birth and property records," Holmes said briskly. "A matter of urgency." The clerk blinked at him. "Of course, sir. What name?" "Henry Acton, Mayfair residence." The man nodded, flipping through a large registry. His fingers moved quickly, scanning the lines with practiced efficiency. Holmes watched him like a hawk. After a moment, the clerk frowned. "That is odd," he muttered. My breath caught. "What is?" The man shook his head. "It seems there was an entry for a Henry Acton, but it's gone. The space where it should be, it's blank." Holmes's expression did not change, but I saw the flicker of something in his eyes, something that looked dangerously close to unease. "Let me check another ledger," the clerk murmured, rising from his seat and disappearing into the back room. The moment he was gone, Holmes turned to me. "This confirms it. Someone has gone beyond mere deception, Watson. They are rewriting history itself." Before I could respond, the clerk returned, carrying an older volume. He flipped it open, scanning the entries. Then he paled. "That's impossible," he whispered. Holmes leaned in. "Explain." The clerk swallowed hard. "The ink, it's faded, as if the name has been erased over time. But that's not the impossible part." He turned the book toward us, tapping a space on the page. Someone, or something, removed his name, but it left the date behind. Holmes's eyes flickered. "The date?" "Yes," the man whispered. "It says Henry Acton was born, on a date that does not exist." I felt my breath freeze in my lungs. Holmes stared at the page. "Show me." The clerk turned the ledger toward us, his fingers trembling as they hovered over a specific line. There it was, a blank space where the name should have been. But beside it, unfaded, untouched by time, was the date. February 31st, a date that had never existed. The three of us stood in silence, the weight of the moment pressing down like a physical force. Holmes exhaled through his nose. "This is no mere error." The clerk shook his head. It's unnatural." I swallowed hard. "What does it mean, Holmes?" He turned to me, his expression unreadable. "It means, Watson, that we are not dealing with the simple erasure of a man's life. We are dealing with an intrusion into the very fabric of time." A shiver ran through me. The clerk hesitated, his voice barely above a whisper. I think you should leave, gentlemen." Holmes inclined his head. "Indeed, and you would. Do well to forget we ever asked." We turned and strode from the office back into the night. The fog had grown heavier, almost unnatural in its density. As we stepped onto the pavement, Holmes whispered more to himself than to me. "A name can vanish. A house can disappear. But a date cannot lie. And this one should not exist." Stood beneath the gas lamps, two men at the edge of a mystery that defied everything we understood. Somewhere, in the depths of London's fog, something watched, and we were running out of time. Chapter 5. The Door That Should Not Open. London's fog had thickened to a near impenetrable veil as Holmes and I stepped away from Somerset House, the gas lamps barely illuminating the narrow pavement beneath our feet. The revelation of February 31st, a date that had never existed, was a stain upon reason itself, a tear in the very fabric of logic. Yet Holmes strode forward, undeterred, his mind working through the impossible as if it were merely another puzzle. To be unravelled, I, however, could not shake the feeling that we were no longer just investigators in this case. We were now participants. "Holmes," I said, keeping my voice low, "what exactly does this mean? If Acton's birth date is tied to something that never happened, how could he have lived at all?" Holmes did not break stride. "It is not a question of how he lived, Watson. It is a question of how he was allowed to be remembered." He hailed a passing cab, barely waiting for it to stop before stepping inside. I followed quickly, shutting the door behind me. Holmes gave the driver an address that sent an unpleasant shiver through me. "Welby Street," I said, glancing at him. Holmes gave a sharp nod. If Acton's house was removed, then it was removed, deliberately. And where something has been erased, Watson, something else is often left behind. We arrived at Welby Street just as the final traces of daylight surrendered to the city's gloom. The lamps flickered weakly in the thickening fog, casting long, wavering shadows upon the cobblestones. Holmes stood motionless before the place where 18 Welby Street should have been. The gap between 17 and 19 remained unbroken. No vacant lot, no boarded-up ruin. Only an absence. But I could feel it again. That subtle wrongness. A distortion at the edge of perception. Holmes took a slow step forward, and I followed, a breath catching in my throat as I saw something shift at the corner of my vision. A door. It was there for only a fraction of a second. A dark, narrow door wedged between the two buildings where nothing should have been. Then, as soon as I had seen it, it was gone. I turned sharply. "Holmes!" I saw it. His voice was calm, but his eyes burned with intent. A heavy silence hung between us. Then Holmes stepped forward and reached out, and this time the door did not disappear. his fingers pressed against smooth polished wood. A door that did not exist in the waking world, but was undeniably real beneath his touch. The gas lamps flickered. Somewhere in the distance, a carriage rattled past. "Watson," Holmes said, his voice barely above a whisper, "are you prepared to enter a place that logic itself has abandoned?" I swallowed, forcing down my unease. "If you go in, Holmes, then so do I," Holmes exhaled, a brief nod acknowledging my resolve. Then he turned the handle. The door swung inward without a sound, and we stepped into a house that should not exist. The moment we crossed the threshold, the temperature plummeted. A strange pressure settled over me, like the air was denser here, thicker, not with dust, but with time itself. Holmes moved forward, his footfalls unnervingly muffled, as though the floor did not quite wish to acknowledge our presence. I followed cautiously, every instinct screaming that we did not belong in this place. The corridor stretched long and narrow, impossibly so. It seemed to extend far beyond the mere space that should have been available between the buildings outside. Faint light flickered from a gas lamp on the wall. The flame was too still. Then I saw them, footprints in the dust, leading deeper into the house. I opened my mouth to speak, but Holmes raised a hand, silencing me. He was studying the walls. They were lined with portraits, all identical. Every frame contained the same image, a faceless man, the silhouette of a gentleman in fine attire, his stance formal, his posture dignified, but where his face should have been, there was only an empty void. Holmes turned to me. Someone wanted to ensure that even if he were remembered, his face never would be. A shiver passed through me. Who would go to such lengths? Holmes did not answer. He was already moving forward. We followed the footprints. They led us to a heavy wooden door at the end of the corridor. Holmes hesitated only for a moment before pushing it open. Inside was a study. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and candle wax. The room was frozen in time, a space abandoned, in haste but never reclaimed. Bookshelves lined the walls, their contents untouched by dust. A desk sat in the centre, an open journal resting upon it, as if its owner had only just left. Holmes crossed the room swiftly, his fingers hovering over the book before finally turning it toward us. The handwriting was precise, elegant, but incomplete. Each entry ended abruptly, the words trailing off mid-sentence, and then, on the final page, a name. Henry Acton. I let out a breath. So he was real. Holmes remained silent. He was staring at the last words scrawled on the page. They are coming. I hear them in the walls. Soon I too will be. The ink had bled, as if the sentence had been written in great haste. But there was no signature, no final mark of the writer's existence. Holmes's fingers closed over the edge of the journal. "We are not alone," turned sharply. "What?" "Listen." At first I heard nothing, only the sound of my own breath. Then a slow, deliberate creak from above. Holmes's eyes locked onto mine. "The house," he murmured, "is remembering us." A shadow passed across the doorway, and the candle flame flickered. Chapter 6. The House That Watches, a silence thick enough to smother sound stretched between Holmes and me. The candle flickered again, not from a draught, from movement. Holmes's gaze remained locked on the doorway, his posture uncharacteristically still. My hand drifted instinctively toward the pocket where my revolver rested, but even as my fingers brushed the grip, a deep sense of wrongness settled over me. The house had remembered us, and something within it was stirring. I swallowed, forcing my voice to remain steady. "Holmes, what did you hear?" Holmes did not look at me. His gaze flicked toward the ceiling. "Not heard, Watson. Felt." A faint creak, too deliberate to be the house settling, pressed against the silence. It was above us. Slow, measured footsteps. Holmes exhaled barely a whisper. "We are not the only ones who have crossed into a place that should not exist." I glanced at the open journal, the inked words stark against the yellowed pages. "They are coming. I hear them in the walls." A cold breath crawled down my spine. I moved toward the door, but Holmes caught my sleeve. "Not yet." He reached into his coat and withdrew a small vial, uncorking it with practiced ease. The sharp, acrid scent of chemical phosphor hit my nose, one of Holmes's many concoctions for exposing hidden traces. He poured a few drops onto the open journal. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the ink shifted. Words that had not been there before bled through the page, surfacing like whispers from the past. "If you have found this, you remember. But remembering is dangerous. They are listening. They know when their name is spoken. If you see the door, it is already too late." Holmes's jaw tightened. Fascinating. I stared at him. "Holmes, this is not the time for fascination." The floorboards above us groaned. Then a knock. Not from the walls, not from the door, from inside the room. I spun sharply, my pulse hammering, but there was nothing. The candle on the desk flickered, again casting strange, shifting shadows along the study walls. Then Holmes spoke. "Watson." His voice was measured, too controlled. I turned slowly, only to find his gaze fixed not on the doorway, not on the ceiling, but on the mirror against the far wall. And there, reflected in its warped glass, a figure stood behind us. Not a man, not entirely. The shape was human-like, its form draped in black, as though reality itself had folded inward to obscure its presence. I spun on instinct, but nothing was there. Yet when I turned back to the mirror, it still was. Holmes stepped forward. "A trick of perception," he murmured, "but one designed with purpose." I could barely find my voice. "Holmes, what is this?" He studied the reflection, his head tilting slightly. Then he raised a hand, and the figure in the mirror did not move. It was watching, not mimicking, watching. Holmes exhaled, his voice disturbingly calm. Curious, I fought the urge to look away. Every instinct in me screamed that acknowledging the thing in the mirror was a mistake. Holmes took another step toward the glass. His hand hovered just above the surface. Then, very softly, the figure leaned forward. Holmes yanked his hand back. The candle snuffed out. The room plunged into darkness. For a breathless moment, there was nothing but silence. Then a whisper. "Close! Too close! Leave!" The voice was neither male nor female, neither young nor old. Dude came from everywhere and nowhere. My heart pounded in my chest. I fumbled for the matchbox in my pocket, striking a light. The room was empty. The mirror was gone. The journal on the desk was closed. The candle, once snuffed out, was now burning again, as though nothing had happened. Holmes straightened, brushing dust from his coat. How utterly fascinating! I gaped at him. Fascinating! Holmes, someone was just in this room with us. He turned to me, and for the first time I saw it. Not fear, but something close to it. Not for himself, for the case, for the logic that had failed him. He picked up the journal again, flipping to the page where the hidden ink had revealed its warning. It was blank. Holmes set the book down carefully. Then he adjusted his coat and turned toward the door. "We are done here." I hesitated. Just like that. He did not look back. We have learned what we needed to learn. I glanced once more at the now ordinary study, my stomach twisting with unease. Then I followed him into the hall. As we stepped out of the room, I cast one final look over my shoulder. For the briefest second, I saw the door at the end of the corridor again, the one that had led us inside. It was closing, on its own, and as it did, I caught a last glimpse of something standing in the dark, not moving, just watching. Then the door disappeared. We stepped onto the pavement outside, the cold London air feeling almost too sharp after the suffocating presence of the house. I turned back toward where the door had been. It was gone. No empty space. No trace of its existence. Just the smooth, uninterrupted wall between 17 and 19. Holmes pulled his coat tighter against the wind. It will not let us return. A deep dread settled in my stomach. Holmes, what have we uncovered? He exhaled slowly, his breath curling in the cold. Something that should not exist. Something that, if we are not careful, will ensure that we do not exist either. He reached into his coat pocket, withdrawing the London Gazette, the last, tangible proof of Henry Acton's disappearance. Then he froze. The paper was blank. I stared, unable to find words. Holmes's fingers tightened around the page. "It has begun." I swallowed. "What has?" He looked at me. "The process of making us forget." A silence stretched between us. Then, very softly, Holmes whispered, "Watson, tell me, what were we investigating?" I opened my mouth, and for a terrifying second, I could not remember. Chapter 7. The Case That Fades. Stood on the fog-drenched pavement, my breath curling in the cold air. Holmes's question lingered between us. "Watson, tell me, what were we investigating?" Mouth opened, but no answer came. I knew there was a case. I knew Holmes had been unravelling some mystery, something unusual, something that had unsettled even him. And yet, when I tried to summon the details, I found myself grasping at fog. I exhaled sharply, gripping my temples. We were following a man's disappearance, weren't we? Holmes studied me with an intensity that only deepened my unease. What man, Watson? I struggled for the name. It had been there just moments ago. A name attached to a case unlike any other. But now it slipped through my grasp like water. I turned to Holmes, alarm rising in my chest. "You must remember." His silence was more terrifying than if he had denied it outright. Then, at last, he spoke. I remember the house. I let out a breath. Relief. Then Holmes's jaw tightened, but not why we entered it. A slow, creeping dread settled into my bones. Something had reached into our minds, and it was erasing us. Holmes did not waste another moment. He turned on his heel, striding briskly down the street. Come, Watson. I followed without hesitation. Where are we going? To the one place that still holds records beyond the reach of human recollection. Took me a moment to understand. Then realization struck. The British Museum. If there had ever been a man, whoever he was, his existence must have left a mark somewhere, and if conventional records had been wiped, then perhaps something older, something etched in the quiet halls of the museum, would remain. We hailed a cab, the city blurring past as Holmes sat in deep concentration, his fingers pressed together beneath his chin. I could see the battle within him. Holmes, who had solved the great mysteries of our time. Holmes, who had defeated the most cunning criminal minds in London. Holmes, who now found himself unravelling. As the cab jolted to a stop, I risked one final question. Holmes, if they are erasing the case, why do we still remember anything at all? He did not look at me as he answered. Because, Watson, they have not yet finished. The British Museum loomed before us, a monolith of stone and history. Its grand columns stood firm against time, its halls a vault of knowledge untouched by the fleeting nature of human memory. Holmes led the way inside, moving with purpose. He bypassed the main halls, leading us toward the archives, where the oldest records of London's inhabitants were kept. A clerk sat behind a long desk, peering up at us with mild disinterest. Holmes wasted no time. We require access to estate, registries and private citizen records, particularly those predating this decade. The clerk raised an eyebrow. For what name, sir? Holmes hesitated, and then I saw it. The flicker of something I had never seen before in him. Doubt. I gripped the edge of the desk. Surely you recall Holmes? But I could see it in his eyes. The name was gone. Holmes inhaled slowly, his mind working at a pace I could not comprehend. Then he turned to the clerk, his voice steady despite the impossible weight upon it. We require records for properties registered to an owner that no longer exists. The clerk blinked. I beg your pardon? Holmes's lips pressed together. I suspect you will find a discrepancy in Welby Street. Check it. The clerk hesitated, but at Holmes's unyielding stare he relented, rising from his seat and vanishing into the back rooms. We waited in silence. The gas lamps flickered overhead, casting long shadows across the marble floors. I could hear the faint scratching of pen against parchment in the distant halls, the quiet murmur of scholars bent over ancient texts. And yet there was something else, a presence. I turned sharply, but there was no one there. Holmes exhaled, rubbing his temple. They are watching. I barely had time to process the words before the clerk returned, his face a shade paler than before. He clutched a thin, yellowed file in his hands. This cannot be. Holmes reached for it immediately, flipping it open. A single document lay within. Not a deed, Not a record of purchase, a warning, handwritten, faded, ancient. You are not meant to know this. Leave now, or forget forever. The words struck like a hammer against my mind. I felt the weight of them. Heavy. Wrong. Holmes's expression did not change. There is no record of an owner. The clerk swallowed hard. No, just this. Holmes turned to me. They have gone beyond erasure. They have rewritten history itself. My throat was dry. Then what do we do? Holmes closed the file carefully. Then he looked at me with a calm I did not trust. Do what they do not expect, Watson. And what is that? We remember. We left the museum in silence. Holmes walked with an urgency I had only seen in the most desperate of cases. Where to now? I asked. He glanced at me, and when he spoke, his voice was softer than before. To someone who cannot forget, frowned. And who might that be? Holmes exhaled slowly. The one man who records everything. Then he gave a name. A name I had not thought of in years. A name that had no business being connected to this mystery. Mycroft Holmes. I stopped in my tracks. Your brother? Holmes gave a tight nod. Mycroft is the closest thing London has to an infallible memory. If they have erased records, if they have altered history, he will know. A knot formed in my stomach. And if he doesn't? Holmes did not answer, because he knew the truth. If Mycroft could not remember, then we were already lost. The fog had thickened as we approached the Diogenes Club, the exclusive establishment where Mycroft spent most of his waking hours. It was a place of silence and discretion, a sanctuary for those who wished to be left alone. Holmes strode inside without hesitation. The steward barely acknowledged us as we entered the quiet, dimly lit hall. Mycroft Holmes sat in his usual chair by the fireplace, his gaze distant, his fingers steepled before him. Holmes spoke without preamble. Mycroft, tell me, do you remember Henry Acton? A beat of silence. Mycroft's gaze flickered up to meet his brother's. Then a pause. Too long, too deliberate. And then a slow, knowing smile. My dear Sherlock, Mycroft murmured, you truly do not understand what you have done. Chapter 8. The Truth That Watches. Back Mycroft's words hung between us like an executioner's blade. You truly do not understand what you have done. Holmes's expression remained unreadable, but I knew him well enough to recognize the rare flicker of uncertainty in his gaze. Mycroft, he said evenly, do not play games. His brother sighed, setting down his untouched glass of brandy. The flames from the hearth cast shadows across his broad face. His usual air of effortless control tinged with something heavier, not fear, resignation. I assume you have discovered something you should not have, Mycroft mused, regarding us both with something that felt dangerously close to pity. Something that should have remained forgotten. Holmes took a step forward. Then you do remember. Mycroft was silent for a long moment. Then he gave a slow nod. Yes, and for your sake, Sherlock, I suggest you forget. Holmes remained utterly still. His sharp, calculating mind would have already seized upon the implications of Mycroft's answer, dissecting them into cold logic. But there was something different now, something even I, his oldest companion struggled to name. Doubt? No. Discomfort. Holmes did not like to be late to a conclusion, and this, I realized, was a game already in play before he had even seen the board. He sat down across from his brother, fingers steepled. Explain. Mycroft sighed, leaning back into his chair. There are things that exist within history, Sherlock, that are not meant to be retained, sometimes not because they are dangerous, but because they are inconvenient. Holmes's lips twitched. Ah, the old notion of selective history. Erasure for the sake of control. Mycroft's eyes darkened. No, not control. Preservation. As flicker of unease twisted in my chest. Holmes, however, remained unimpressed. Then tell me, Mycroft, what does history seek to preserve by forgetting Henry Acton? Mycroft did not flinch at the name. Instead, he exhaled softly. You assume. Henry Acton was a man. A silence stretched between us. I swallowed. Then what was he? Mycroft's fingers traced the rim of his glass. Not what, Dr. Watson. He turned his gaze to Holmes. But when? Holmes's expression did not change, but I saw the slight tightening of his jaw. I too understood the implication before I did. I sat forward. What do you mean, when? Mycroft studied me carefully before speaking. There was a time, long before your records, long before the city as you know it, when something existed that should not have. He leaned in slightly, and for a time, Watson, it wore a name. A shiver passed through me. Henry Acton. Mycroft inclined his head. If that was the last name it used, then yes. I gripped the armrests of my chair. My heart beat in session, uneven drum. You're speaking in riddles, Mycroft. What are you suggesting? Holmes, who had been silent all this time, finally spoke. A man whose history disappears, he murmured, almost to himself. A house that erases itself from existence. A birth date that was never real. He exhaled sharply. It is not merely that Acton has been erased. It is that he was never meant to be remembered at all. Mycroft's silence was answer enough. Holmes turned to him, his voice quieter now. Who erased him? Mycroft hesitated. Then, the question, dear brother, is not who erased him. His gaze lifted, locking onto Holmes with an intensity I had never seen before. It is who brought him back. A sharp chill ran through me. You mean to say that someone has undone this erasure? Mycroft nodded. And in doing so, they have drawn you into something far larger than a mere case. I shook my head. This is absurd. Who would have such power? Holmes gave a quiet chuckle. It was humorless. Mycroft knows. His brother offered a small, measured smile. Naturally. Holmes's fingers tapped once against the table. Then say it. A long pause. Then, the Society of the Lazarus Gate. The name sent an unnatural shiver through me, as if it had weight beyond the spoken word. Holmes's expression remained unreadable. I have encountered many secret organizations, Mycroft. That name, however, is new to me. Mycroft gave a slow nod. It would be. A flicker of irritation crossed Holmes's face. Enough riddles. Mycroft sighed. They are not an organization in the conventional sense, Sherlock. They are not men in back rooms. They are not bound by nation, politics, or wealth. They are older than any of these things. He paused, then added carefully, They do not protect the world, nor do they seek to control it. They merely correct it. Holmes's brow arched. Correct it? Mycroft's fingers curled around his brandy glass, but he did not drink. When something exists that should not, they erase it. The words struck cold. I exhaled sharply. You mean to say they alter history itself? Mycroft met my gaze. You already knew that, Dr. Watson. You just didn't want to believe it. Holmes leaned back, his expression unreadable. If this society has removed Acton, then why are we still able to speak of him at all? Mycroft's expression darkened. Because someone, somewhere, is undoing their work, and that, Sherlock, is very dangerous. Holmes nodded, already moving toward the door. Then we must find out who. Mycroft remained seated. You are playing with something beyond your comprehension. Holmes paused. You give me little credit, brother. Mycroft sighed. Even you cannot outthink time. Holmes smiled faintly. Perhaps not. But time, Mycroft, has already noticed us. He gestured for me to follow. Come, Watson, we have work to do. I hesitated, glancing between them. Where are we going? Holmes's gaze was sharp as steel, to the only person who might know how this began. I frowned. And who might that be? His next words froze the breath in my lungs. The last person who ever saw Henry Acton alive. A silence stretched between us. Then Mycroft spoke, his voice almost a whisper. That will not be an easy task, Sherlock. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Why? Mycroft exhaled slowly. Because that person, dear brother, was you. Chapter 9. The Man Holmes. Forgot. The words settled between us like a verdict. Because that person, dear brother, was you. Holmes did not move. Not at first. His hands remained loosely clasped before him, his sharp features betraying nothing. But I had known him too long, far too long, to miss the slightest tremor beneath his mask of control. Holmes had suspected many things in his time. He had anticipated impossibilities, unravelling mysteries that lesser minds would have deemed unthinkable. But this was something even he had not foreseen. I swallowed against the weight pressing down on my chest. Holmes, I murmured, do you remember? He turned his head slightly toward me, his lips parting just so. Then he stopped. I saw it in his eyes. The void! Holmes closed his fingers into a loose fist, tapping them once against the arm of his chair. Mycroft, he said, his voice unsettlingly even. If I were the last man to see Henry Acton alive, then where, pray tell, is my account of it? Mycroft's gaze did not waver. You tell me. A flicker of irritation passed through Holmes' expression, but it was short-lived. He exhaled, glancing away briefly. When he looked back, there was steel in his voice. You assume too much, brother. If I had ever met this man, I would remember. I saw Mycroft's jaw tighten ever so slightly. Then quietly, would you? Silence. I turned to Holmes, watching his face carefully. His sharp mind was already dissecting the implications, the logical inconsistencies. He wanted to dismiss it, but he could not, because something was missing. A space, a void, an absence he had not noticed until now. Holmes stood abruptly, his movement sharp. Then let us not waste time on speculation. I shot to my feet beside him. Holmes, we must determine whether my own records have been tampered with. I hesitated. Records? He turned toward the door. Watson, if I had spoken to Henry Acton, if I had met him, if I had so much as observed him in passing, then my own notes would bear the proof of it. Something like relief flickered through me. Of course, Holmes kept meticulous records of every case, every detail, every anomaly that passed through his mind. If he had met Acton, then somewhere, a trace of that encounter must remain. Mycroft, however, remained seated. He did not stop us. He only watched as Holmes pulled open the door. "Good luck," he murmured. I could not tell if it was a warning or a farewell. The cab ride back to Baker Street was silent. Holmes sat rigidly, his gaze fixed on the passing streets, his fingers pressed together beneath his chin. I could sense the storm raging within him. Logic dictated that Mycroft was wrong, and yet there was something Holmes was not saying, something he was already beginning to suspect. We arrived at 221B and ascended the familiar steps with haste. Mrs. Hudson, sensing the air of urgency about us, did not attempt to interrupt. Holmes moved swiftly to his desk, his hands precise as they pulled open the top drawer. Inside, meticulously arranged, were his personal case notes. Books filled with dates, observations, sketches, conversations. He retrieved the most recent volume and flipped to the appropriate time frame, the days leading up to Henry Acton's supposed erasure. We leaned in, my breath caught in my throat. Holmes turned a page, then another, and another. Nothing, not a single entry, not a note, not a name, no Henry Acton, nothing at all. And then Holmes stopped. The next page was torn. A long pause, then, very softly, Holmes murmured, "This is impossible." I watched as his fingertips traced the ragged edge of the missing page. His brows drew together, his breathing unnaturally steady. "This is not my doing," he said. "Someone has taken this." I exhaled. Then the question becomes, who? Holmes's fingers twitched. "No, Watson." He turned his head slightly toward me, his expression unreadable. The question becomes, why was it removed at all? A chill ran through me. Holmes was right. If his notes had been tampered with, then the erasure was deliberate. But it was not simply that Henry Acton had been removed from history. It was that Holmes's memory of him had been taken too. Holmes closed the journal carefully, standing. Someone does not wish for me to remember this man, which means we are closer than I thought. His voice was calm, measured, but I could see the tension in his stance. Holmes was rarely unsettled, but now, he was standing at the edge of something he did not understand. I drew a slow breath. If your own records have been altered, then where do we turn next? Holmes was already moving, pulling on his coat. To the last place that has yet to be touched. I frowned. And where is that? His eyes flashed. A witness, I blinked. But Holmes, there are no witnesses. Everyone who knew Henry Acton has either forgotten him or had their records erased. Holmes gave a thin smile. Not everyone. I stared. Then it hit me. The one person who might still remember. The one individual whose mind was sharper than most, but who had already begun to lose her grip on reality. I inhaled sharply. Mrs. Fenton. Holmes nodded. If she recalled anything at all before, then we must assume she may have retained more. She was the closest person to Henry Acton's daily life. His eyes darkened, and if they have not erased her memory entirely, then she may still know something. I grabbed my coat. Then we must move quickly. Holmes's gaze flicked toward the clock. Not quickly, Watson. Immediately. He was right. We had already seen what happened to those who held on to the past, and I feared, deeply, viscerally, that Mrs. Fenton was running out of time. We arrived at New Cavendish Street in haste, the lamps casting flickering halos through the mist. Holmes led the way to Mrs. Fenton's modest residence, his posture taut with purpose. He knocked sharply. Silence. He knocked again. Still nothing. I felt unease coil in my stomach. Holmes wasted no more time. His fingers curled around the handle, testing it, unlocked. A glance passed between us. Then, without another word, Holmes pushed the door open. The house was dark, silent. We stepped inside cautiously, the air thick with something I could not name. The sitting room was as we had left it, neat, untouched, and then a sound from the back of the house. Holmes moved swiftly, his footsteps soundless against the floorboards. I followed, my heart pounding. We reached the doorway to the kitchen. Holmes stepped inside and stopped dead. I moved beside him and felt the breath rip from my lungs. Mrs. Fenton sat at the kitchen table, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Her face was calm, serene, but her eyes were blank. She was breathing, alive, but there was nothing behind her gaze. I whispered, "Mrs. Fenton?" She did not blink. She did not move, and then I saw it. A single piece of paper on the table before her, with one message written in careful, deliberate strokes. She forgot. So will you. Chapter 10. The Mind That Erased Itself, Mrs. Fenton sat motionless, her hands resting gently in her lap, her eyes fixed upon nothing. The only sound in the room was the quiet flickering of the gas lamp. Holmes and I remained rooted in place, the weight of the message before us sinking into our bones. She forgot. So will you. A warning, a promise. I swallowed hard, turning to Holmes. She is alive, Holmes nodded. But is she present? He stepped forward, his movements careful, deliberate. He crouched beside her chair, studying her with the same intensity he reserved for crime scenes and coded letters. "Mrs. Fenton," he murmured, "can you hear me?" She did not blink. Holmes's eyes flicked to her hands. He reached out, gently lifting one of them. Her fingers were limp, cool to the touch. Yet there was no sign of injury, no indication of distress. No physical harm, only absence. His jaw tightened. She is not unconscious, nor is this shock. I hesitated. Then what is it? He exhaled slowly. Something has removed her awareness. A hollow pit opened in my stomach. You mean Holmes's voice was quiet, unreadable. She has been emptied, Watson. The message on the table sat between us like an open wound. She forgot. So will you. I forced myself to think like Holmes, to push aside the unnatural horror of it and focus on what was in front of me. She was coherent when we last saw her, I murmured. She remembered glimpses, fragments. Someone must have realized that was dangerous. Holmes tapped a finger against the table, his mind clearly assembling the puzzle at an alarming pace. Correct. The process of erasure was incomplete. She held on longer than intended. He gestured toward the paper. And then someone finished what was started. I glanced at Mrs. Fenton again. She remained perfectly still, breathing evenly, as if lost in some waking dream. Holmes stood abruptly. We must act quickly. To do what? I asked, standing as well. Holmes's gaze flicked to me. To ensure that we do not suffer the same fate. I felt the breath leave my lungs. The message was not just a statement, it was a certainty. Holmes turned, his coat sweeping behind him as he strode towards the sitting room. There may still be something here, something that they did not have. Time to remove. I cast one last look at Mrs. Fenton before following him, my pulse hammering in my throat. Holmes moved swiftly, scanning the room, his gaze darting from shelf to shelf, cabinet to cabinet. He paused at the writing desk, his hands running along the surface, checking for any sign of disturbance. He stopped suddenly, his fingers tracing the edge of a small key. Locked drawer, he murmured. I watched as he retrieved the key and turned it in the lock. The drawer slid open with a faint creak. Inside was a single envelope. No markings, no seal. Holmes removed it carefully, lifting the flap. He extracted a folded sheet of parchment and unfolded it, his sharp gaze scanning the words. I stepped closer. What does it say? Holmes did not immediately answer. Then, after a beat, he exhaled. It appears, he said softly, that Mrs. Fenton wrote herself a letter. Holmes set the paper on the table between us. The ink was hurried, the strokes uneven, as if written in desperation. If I forget, I must leave this behind. I do not know how much time I have. They are coming. They have been here before. I see the space where the house should be, but I cannot see the house. I remember that it was there, but I cannot remember its walls. I cannot recall the door I stood before. Henry Acton spoke to me before he vanished. He told me. The sentence ended abruptly. The ink had trailed off, as if she had been interrupted, or as if her mind had slipped away in the middle of the thought. I inhaled sharply. She tried to warn herself. Holmes's jaw clenched. Yes, and she failed. I turned toward him, my mind racing. Holmes, if she knew something, if she left us a clue, then perhaps her memory can still be recovered. Holmes's eyes flickered with something I rarely saw. Doubt. She is here, Watson. But she is not herself. He hesitated, then, very softly. They took more than her memories. They took the part of her that could have fought to remember. A silence stretched between us. Then, suddenly, a sharp knock at the front door. Holmes stiffened. I saw his hand twitch toward his coat, where his revolver remained concealed. I swallowed, expecting someone. Holmes did not reply. The knock came again. Deliberate, measured, not hurried, not frantic, as if whoever stood beyond the door knew exactly who was inside. Holmes moved first. I followed, every nerve in my body on edge, reached for the handle, hesitated for the briefest of moments, then pulled the door open. A figure stood in the fog, dressed in a dark formal coat, a bowler hat perched neatly atop his head. His features were partially obscured by the mist, but what struck me most was the absence of surprise. He was not startled to see us, not confused. He had come expecting us. Holmes did not move. "Who are you?" The man smiled faintly. "You already know the answer to that, Mr. Holmes." His voice was smooth, unnaturally calm. Holmes remained impassive. "Why are you here?" The man tilted his head slightly. "To ensure you do not stray further." My breath caught. Further from what? The man's gaze flickered toward me, as if I were a curiosity more than a threat. Then he returned his attention to Holmes. "You do not understand what you are chasing." Holmes's lips pressed into a thin line. "Then explain it to me." A pause, then, "No," the man exhaled, adjusting his gloves. "It is better for all involved if you turn back now." Holmes studied him. "You know I will not." The man smiled again. This time it did not reach his eyes. "No, Mr. Holmes, I know that you cannot." Then, before either of us could react, he reached into his coat pocket. Holmes tensed, but the man did not produce a weapon. Instead, he extended his hand, holding a single folded piece of paper. Holmes did not take it. The man did not insist. He simply let it fall onto the doorstep. Then, tipping his hat slightly, he turned, walking calmly into the fog. Holmes did not move. Neither did I. For a long moment we simply stood there. Then, slowly, Holmes crouched down, retrieving the folded page. His fingers unfolded it carefully. There were only 3 words. "You were warned." Chapter 11. The letter that should not exist. The words on the paper, "You were warned," sat between us like an accusation. Holmes read them twice, his expression unreadable. Then, with a flick of his wrist, he folded the note and tucked it into his coat pocket. I exhaled sharply, glancing into the fog where the stranger had disappeared. "Holmes, who in God's name was that?" Holmes turned back toward the house, stepping inside without answering. I followed quickly, shutting the door behind us. His silence unnerved me more than his deductions ever had. He moved to the sitting room, his fingers brushing the edge of the desk, before he stopped abruptly. Then, without looking at me, he murmured, "Watson, repeat what we were investigating." I frowned. "We were investigating Henry Acton." Holmes turned slowly. His gaze was sharp, measuring. "And who is Henry Acton?" The question struck me as absurd, but as I opened my mouth, I faltered. I knew he had existed. I knew we had been chasing something, unravelling a mystery no one else could see. And yet, for a fraction of a second, the details eluded me. A cold dread curled in my stomach. "Holmes?" His expression remained calm, but I could see the flicker of urgency beneath the surface. "Good," he said quietly. "Then we are still ahead of them." I swallowed hard. "You believe they are actively removing our memories?" Holmes nodded. "And they are running out of patience." His hand curled into a fist. The warning was not for me, Watson. It was for you. I shook my head. Holmes, if they are erasing him, then why have we held on as long as we have? Why do we still remember Acton at all? Holmes's fingers drummed against the desk, because memory is not an isolated thing. He gestured toward the forgotten, Mrs. Fenton, still seated, still lost within herself. She was alone in what she knew. No one reinforced her recollections. No one confirmed her reality, and so she became untethered. I inhaled sharply. But you and I, we speak of him. We reaffirm his existence. Holmes nodded. Exactly. That is why we still hold on. I rubbed a hand over my face. Then what is their next move? To exhaled. To separate us. A chill ran through me. They will attempt to isolate one of us, Watson. If they erase only one mind, the other will not know what is missing. My hands clenched. Then we do not separate. Holmes gave me a sharp look. Precisely, I nodded. Then what is our next step? Holmes turned toward the letter we had found. The half-finished warning Mrs. Fenton had left herself. She wrote that Henry Acton spoke to her before he vanished. I inhaled sharply. Then he was aware of what was happening to him. Holmes's voice was quiet. Yes. We exchanged a glance. For the first time, we had confirmation. Henry Acton knew, and if he knew, then somewhere there had to be proof. Holmes moved swiftly, retrieving the envelope from Mrs. Fenton's drawer. He turned, it over in his hands, frowning. This was not meant for us, he murmured. I frowned. What do you mean? Holmes's fingers traced the inside of the envelope. Then suddenly, his eyes flickered. He reached inside, not for the letter, but for the inner lining. A moment later, his fingers found something. A second sheet of paper, pressed thinly between the folds. He extracted it carefully, unfolding it. The ink was faded. The handwriting was different from Mrs. Fenton's, more precise. Holmes's lips pressed into a thin line. This, he murmured, was written by Henry Acton himself. The parchment was fragile, the edges yellowed with time. Holmes laid it flat upon the desk, and we both leaned in. I know what is happening. I know they are coming. I do not know how much longer I will remain in my own mind. If you find this, you must understand. I have left something behind. I have hidden it where the world cannot touch it. If they erase me, if they remove my name, then the only way to find me is to seek what should not be there. It is buried beneath the ink. A heavy silence followed. Holmes exhaled slowly. He left a record. My pulse quickened. Where, Holmes? Traced the words again, his eyes narrowing. He says it is hidden, beneath the ink. I frowned. What does that mean? Holmes straightened suddenly. Watson, the newspaper. My breath caught. The London Gazette, the last known record of Henry Acton before his name disappeared. Holmes moved swiftly to the pile of papers on the desk, sifting through them until he retrieved the copy of the Gazette, the very one we had used to confirm Acton's erasure. He laid it flat before us. At first glance, it was nothing more than a simple page of text. The ink had faded in places, but it looked no different from any other document. Holmes reached into his coat pocket, withdrawing the vial of chemical phosphor, the same solution he had used to uncover Mrs. Fenton's hidden ink. He uncorked it, letting a few drops fall onto the page. The effect was immediate. A second layer of writing bloomed beneath the text, the ink that should not have been there. I held my breath as the letters formed, words written beneath the surface, hidden within, the very fabric of the page. They will come for me soon. I cannot stop them. But I have left behind the truth. Seek the one record they cannot erase. Seek the ledger of the Lazarus Gate. I swallowed. Holmes, what is the Lazarus Gate? Holmes did not answer immediately. His fingers ran over the words, his mind racing. Then, at last, he spoke. "It is," he murmured, "something even Mycroft fears." A beat of silence, then a sudden crash from the front of the house, the sound of glass shattering, and then a voice from the hallway. "You should not have found that." The glass shattered. A gust of cold air surged through the sitting room, carrying the scent of damp cobblestones and the lingering smog of London's streets. Holmes moved before I could react, his hand whipping inside his coat. In a single fluid motion, his revolver was raised, trained on the darkened hallway. Then, footsteps, measured, deliberate. Whoever had entered was in no hurry. Holmes remained, utterly still, his grip unwavering. My pulse hammered in my throat as I reached for my own weapon. Then a figure stepped into the doorway. Tall, dressed in a dark coat and gloves. The gaslight flickered across his face, revealing sharp cheekbones, thin lips, and eyes that gleamed with something unreadable. He did not appear startled to see us, nor did he flinch at the gun pointed directly at his chest. Instead, he gave a small, polite nod. "You should not have found that," he said again, his voice smooth, detached. Holmes did not lower his weapon. And yet we did. A thin smile. Yes, quite inconvenient. Holmes's gaze flickered over the man, assessing every detail. Then, very calmly, he said, "You are not here to kill us." The man's expression did not change. "No." I gritted my teeth. "Then why break into our home?" His eyes turned to me. "To ensure that you do not take the next step." Holmes exhaled through his nose. The ledger of the Lazarus Gate. A flicker of something, surprise, amusement, passed through the man's gaze. "Ah, so you have deciphered the message." Holmes tilted his head slightly. "Not entirely, but I will." The man did not answer immediately. Instead, he took a slow step forward. Holmes did not move, but I saw his finger tense slightly against the trigger. The intruder's lips curved into something resembling a smirk. "You are correct, Mr. Holmes. I am not here to kill you." Gaze flickered to me, "But that does not mean you will leave this house unchanged." A chill ran through me. Holmes's voice remained calm. "Explain." The man exhaled softly, as though this entire exchange were mildly tedious. "You are standing on the edge of something, detective. Something vast. You do not comprehend what you are unravelling." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Then enlighten me." A pause. Then the man reached into his coat pocket. Holmes stiffened, his weapon rising a fraction, but the intruder merely withdrew a small folded piece of paper. He extended it toward Holmes. Holmes did not take it immediately. His gaze flickered to mine, then back to the man. Finally, he reached forward, plucking it from the stranger's grasp. The man gave a small nod, almost satisfied. Then, before I could so much as blink, he stepped backward into the shadow of the hallway and vanished. Silence. I exhaled sharply, my pulse still pounding. Holmes! Holmes ignored me. He had already unfolded the paper. His eyes scanned the contents, his expression giving nothing away. I moved closer, peering over his shoulder. The writing was precise, almost mechanical. You are approaching a door that does not open. You seek a record that was never written. If you turn back now, you may live a life that is yours. If you continue forward, you will forget the man you were. The Lazarus Gate is not a place. It is a choice. I swallowed hard. Holmes said nothing. I turned to him. Holmes, what does it mean? He remained motionless for a long moment, then softly. It means we have found our next destination. Holmes did not sleep, neither did I. We spent the next hours poring over every detail, every clue, every fragmented piece of this impossible puzzle. Henry Acton had left behind a message, a record hidden beneath ink. The stranger had warned us. The Lazarus Gate was not a place, yet, somehow, it was still something we could reach. Holmes sat motionless in his chair, his fingers steepled before him, his mind a storm of calculations and possibilities. At last, just as the first light of dawn broke over the London skyline, he spoke. The British Library. I blinked. What? Holmes stood abruptly, retrieving his coat. If a ledger exists, then the closest thing to a record will be in the oldest archives available to us. I frowned. But the stranger said the Lazarus Gate was not a place. Holmes adjusted his cuffs. No, Watson. He said it was a choice. Swallowed. And what choice is that? Holmes turned to me. His voice was quiet. To remember. The British Library loomed before us, its great stone columns bathed in the pale light of morning. Holmes moved with purpose, his steps swift as he led me through the grand halls, past towering bookshelves and endless corridors of history. We reached the restricted archives. Holmes did not hesitate. He strode to the front desk, fixing the librarian with his sharp gaze. We require access to the oldest census records of London, he said smoothly. Specifically, those that may contain discrepancies. The librarian, an elderly man with silver-rimmed spectacles, frowned. I beg your pardon, sir. Holmes's expression remained unreadable. Show me the records of those who do not exist. The librarian hesitated, then, slowly, reluctantly, he turned and led us downward. The archives beneath the British Library were cold. The scent of old paper and ink filled the narrow aisles as we moved through the labyrinth of records. Last, the librarian stopped before a heavy wooden cabinet. He withdrew a key from his coat, unlocking it with a quiet click. Holmes stepped forward as the doors swung open. Inside, stacks of ledgers. Faded, ancient, the librarian exhaled. These are unverified, names that have no trace beyond these pages. Holmes did not respond. He had already pulled one from the shelf. His fingers flipped through the brittle pages, scanning names, dates, forgotten histories. Then his hand stopped. I stepped closer. Holmes? His jaw tightened. His fingers curled around the edges of the page. I followed his gaze, and then I saw it. The last name on the ledger, Henry Acton. The ink was smudged, almost erased, but beneath it, faint, nearly imperceptible, was another name, one that made my breath freeze in my lungs, one I recognized instantly. Sherlock Holmes. Chapter 13. The Name That Should Not Be. There my breath caught in my throat. Holmes's name, written where it should not exist, faded, nearly erased, but there. For the first time, I saw something unfamiliar flicker across his face. Not shock, not fear, recognition. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to remain steady. "Holmes, why is your name here?" He did not answer immediately. His fingers traced the smudged ink, as though testing the reality of it beneath his touch. Finally, he exhaled. "I do not know." The librarian, still standing behind us, shifted uncomfortably. "I believe," he murmured, "you have found what you were looking for." Holmes's gaze snapped up. "No!" His voice was quiet, cold. "This is only the beginning." Holmes turned to the librarian. "Who compiled this ledger?" The man hesitated, clearly unnerved by the weight of the moment. Sir, these records are incomplete, unverified." Holmes's stare did not waver. "Who compiled them?" A long pause, then, reluctantly, "They were gathered from old estate records, forgotten wills, abandoned census reports. Names that existed for a moment in history, then disappeared." I swallowed. Why would my friend's name be here? The librarian exhaled, adjusting his spectacles. If his name is written, then at some point it was meant to be erased. I turned sharply to Holmes. "You told me back in Mycroft's office that Henry Acton had not simply been forgotten, but that someone had deliberately removed him from history." Holmes nodded once. I gestured at the page. "Then that means, yes, Watson." Smith's voice was steady, but something dark lurked beneath it. "At some point, I was meant to be erased too." Holmes turned back to the ledger, flipping pages rapidly. He scanned each one with surgical precision, searching for more anomalies. Then, suddenly, he stopped again. His jaw tightened. I leaned in. "What is it?" He tapped a name, one I did not recognize. Nathaniel Graves. The ink was fresh. Unlike the others, this name had not faded. It had not been erased. It had been added recently. Holmes exhaled sharply, his mind racing. "This is the next one." I frowned. "The next what?" Holmes turned to me, his expression unreadable. "The next man to disappear." We did not waste a second. Holmes extracted the ledger from the cabinet, tucking it beneath his coat. The librarian made a weak sound of protest, but Holmes silenced him with a single glance. "We will return it," he assured. "If we are able." The words sent an uneasy shiver down my spine. Holmes and I hurried from the archives, emerging onto the cold London streets. The sky had darkened with thick clouds, and the city felt quieter than before, as if it too were holding its breath. We climbed into a waiting cab. Holmes rapped the side sharply. "Newcastle Street, now!" The driver flicked the reins, and the horses lurched forward. I turned to Holmes. "Who is Nathaniel Graves?" His fingers drummed against his knee. "Unknown." I blinked. "Then how do you know? He's real? Holmes's lips pressed into a thin line, because if he were not, his name would not be there at all. I exhaled. You mean to say? Yes, Watson. Holmes's eyes flickered with cold calculation. Someone is undoing the erasures. We arrived at Newcastle Street within the hour. It was quiet, too quiet. The buildings loomed like silent sentinels, their brick facades washed pale under the dim glow of the gas lamps. Holmes moved swiftly, scanning door numbers. Then he stopped. A modest, unassuming townhouse stood before us. No sign of life, no movement from within. But the door, it was open, just slightly. Holmes glanced at me. Be prepared. I nodded, hand tightening around my revolver. We stepped inside. The air was thick, not with dust or decay, but with something else, a presence, a wrongness. The sitting room was undisturbed. A cup of tea sat half-finished on a small wooden table. The newspaper lay folded, as though its owner had set it down only moments ago. And yet the house was empty. Holmes moved through the room, his sharp gaze flickering over every surface. He stopped near the writing desk. His fingers brushed against the paper lying there. A letter. The ink was still fresh. He read the first line aloud. If you are reading this, then I am already gone. A cold shiver ran through me. Holmes, he continued, reading. I know they are coming. I know they will take my name, my life, my past. I do not know if I will remember myself by the time they arrive. But I know this. I was not the first, and I will not be the last. Find the Lazarus Gate before they erase it again. Holmes set the letter down carefully. His expression was unreadable. I forced myself to speak. What does this mean? He exhaled. It means we are running out of time. Then the air shifted, the gas lamps flickered, and from somewhere inside the house, a whisper. Not a word, not a sound of the wind. Something else. Holmes's hand went to his revolver. Watson, I swallowed. Yes? He did not take his eyes off the hallway ahead. Did you close the front door? My blood turned to ice. No! The door slammed shut. The whisper became a voice, soft, too close. You do not belong here. The lamps died. Darkness swallowed us whole. Chapter 14. The Voice in the Dark. The darkness descended upon us like a suffocating shroud, the room swallowed whole by the absence of light. For a moment I could not move. The silence was deafening, oppressive. Holmes's hand remained steady on his revolver. I could feel the tension in his posture, the way his body coiled, preparing for something. Then a faint creak. A sound, footsteps, but not from the hallway, not from the house, from within the room. Holmes's eyes darted to the shadows, his instincts sharpening. Stay close, Watson. I nodded, my heart racing, and we edged toward the far wall. My mind screamed at me to move, faster, but every step felt heavy. The whispering voice, the one that had spoken through the darkness, lingered in the air, a presence in the room. The floorboards creaked again. Who's there? Holmes called out, his voice sharp, commanding. For a moment there was nothing. Then the voice returned, softer this time, almost a sigh. You should have never come. I froze. The voice was different this time, older. Holmes's eyes narrowed. He moved toward the source of the sound, every sense alert, searching for any hint of movement. "Show yourself." And then a flash of light, barely perceptible, but enough to make the shadows shift. I turned just in time to see the outline of a figure emerge from the darkness. A man, tall, cloaked in a heavy black coat. His face was obscured by the shadows, but his presence, unnatural. Holmes stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tension. "Who are you?" The man did not respond immediately. He took a step closer, and the air seemed to grow colder with each movement. Then he spoke again. "I warned you, Mr. Holmes." His voice was low, almost pitying. "You cannot stop what is already in motion." Holmes's grip on his revolver tightened, but he did not fire. He studied the figure before him, calculating, probing for any weakness. "You are a part of this, the Lazarus Gate." The man's lips curled into a faint smile. "I am not part of your hunt, Holmes. I am merely the messenger." "Messenger?" I repeated, my voice edged with disbelief. "For what?" The man's gaze flicked briefly to me, then back to Holmes. "For the one who controls this world." I took an involuntary step back. The words struck like a blow. Holmes, however, did not flinch. "You speak in riddles, but I know better. Who is pulling your strings?" The figure's head tilted, as though considering Holmes's question. Then he reached into his coat and withdrew something. A small black book. He extended it toward us. "This is where the truth lies." Holmes took a step back. "And you expect us to simply take it?" The man gave a slight nod. "I expect you to read it. But be warned, Mr. Holmes, reading it will cost you." I looked at Holmes, my thoughts racing. "What is it?" Holmes did not respond immediately. His eyes flickered over the book. For a brief second, I saw a flash of recognition. Then he reached out and took the book from the man's outstretched hand. "I will read it." The man smiled once more. This time, the expression was colder, more knowing. The moment Holmes opened the book, I felt a shift in the air, a subtle change, as though the very walls of the house were watching us. My stomach churned. The quiet was unbearable. Holmes flipped through the pages carefully, his eyes scanning the words written in sharp, precise ink. Each page turned with an eerie stillness, as though the book itself was trying to remain silent. The man remained motionless, his gaze fixed on Holmes, waiting. Finally, Holmes stopped at a page near the end. He read the first few lines aloud, his voice steady but betraying the gravity of the words. "The Lazarus Gate was never meant to be found. The past must be erased, rewritten, for the world to remain whole. If the truth is spoken aloud, the price will be paid. You are bound to the gate. You cannot leave." I swallowed, my throat dry. "Holmes, what does it mean? What price?" Holmes continued reading, his face unreadable. "You seek to know. You seek the door, but the door is not for you. Those who enter the gate do not return, for they become part of it. They are the ones who hold the truth." Suddenly, the door to the room slammed open. I spun around, my heart thumping in my chest. The room was filled with light, too much light, It flooded in from the hallway, casting everything into stark contrast. A figure stepped into the doorway, not the man who had been standing before us, but someone else. A woman, tall, with dark eyes and an air of purpose that filled the room. Her face was familiar, but there was something unsettling about her presence. She moved toward us with an almost predatory grace. Holmes stepped in front of me, instinctively protecting. "Who are you?" The woman's lips curled into a smile. "You still don't know, do you, Sherlock?" The tone was mocking, but there was something in her voice that rang with a deeper truth. Holmes's eyes narrowed. "You are a part of this. The Lazarus Gate." She nodded slowly. "I've been watching you, Holmes. Watching you tear through the veil of the past, but you still don't understand." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. "Understand what?" Her eyes flickered toward the book in Holmes's hand. "What you're holding is not the answer. It's a key. But even that won't help you now." Holmes's jaw tightened, his grip on the book tightening as well. "You're wrong. This is the truth." The woman smiled again. "The truth has always been hidden, Sherlock. And you've been chasing shadows your entire life." She took a step closer, her presence overpowering. "Now, you will face what's coming." Chapter 15. The Price of Truth. The woman's words lingered in the room, heavy as stone. "You've been chasing shadows your entire life." I felt the weight of her gaze, her words sinking deep into my chest. It was as if she could see into the very heart of Holmes and into the labyrinth of his thoughts. Holmes stood frozen, his hand still gripping the book, his knuckles white. There was a quiet intensity in the air, a moment suspended between us all. The woman, this mysterious figure, took another step forward, her eyes never leaving Holmes. "You think you can unlock the mysteries of the Lazarus Gate," she said, her voice cold, detached. "You think you can stop what has already been set into motion. But the truth is, you are part of it." Holmes's gaze never wavered. "What is it you want from us?" Her lips curled into a thin smile, but there was no joy in it. "I don't want anything from you, Sherlock. I'm simply here to make sure you see the truth before it's too late." The room seemed to grow colder. I could see Holmes's jaw tightening. His mind was already working through the implications of what this woman had said. "I'm not interested in your riddles." The woman's smile faded. "Of course you're not." She turned her attention briefly to me. "But you will be, Watson." I felt a sudden chill run through me. "What do you mean by that?" She ignored my question, instead walking to the corner of the room where the gas lamps flickered with a strange, unearthly light. She turned back to us. "You've seen the ledger, you've seen the names, but it's not just about remembering, Sherlock. It's about becoming." I didn't understand. Becoming what? Her eyes met mine, and I saw something in them, something ancient. "You'll see soon enough, Watson, just like your friend here." She nodded toward Holmes. For a moment Holmes remained silent, processing. Then, with a cold edge to his voice, he asked, "What is your connection to this?" The woman took a step closer, her eyes never leaving Holmes. "You've already guessed it, haven't you? I am one of them." "Them," Holmes repeated, his voice a soft echo. "The ones who erase history, the ones who control memory." The woman's smile was fleeting. You call it control, but it's far more than that. This is about preserving the truth that must remain hidden. I stepped forward. The Lazarus Gate? She nodded. The gate is a threshold, not of place, not of time, but of the mind. It takes from you what you think you know, and it gives you what you will become. I felt my head spinning, and if we don't comply, turn to me, her gaze sharp and piercing. You will forget. You will vanish just like the others. The records will be erased, and the world will go on as though you never existed, as though you never mattered. I shuddered, a deep unease settling in my chest. Holmes's voice was quiet, but cutting. You mean to tell me that we, are not even real? That our very existence could be written out of history? Her eyes glinted with something like satisfaction. Precisely. Holmes's hands clenched, but his voice remained controlled. And you are here to ensure we accept this fate, to make us become like you. The woman's lips curled into a thin smile. I don't make the rules. I merely follow them. Holmes's expression darkened. Then what is it you want from us? She tilted her head, her gaze softening, as if seeing something hidden beneath the surface. I'm here to offer you one choice, Holmes. One last choice. The weight of her words pressed against me. What choice? I asked. The woman's smile deepened, but there was no warmth in it. To forget what you know, and live your lives without question, or to remember at a price. I felt my chest tighten. What price? She gave a small shrug, as if the matter were of little consequence to her. The truth always comes at a cost. The question is, Sherlock, how much are you willing to pay? Holmes did not flinch. He stood tall, unwavering. I will pay whatever it takes. The woman's eyes gleamed. Then you will understand soon enough. For a long moment, the room was silent. The atmosphere thickened, pressing against us. It felt as though the very walls were breathing. Then, without warning, the woman turned and walked toward the door. She stopped just before crossing the threshold, her back to us. You think you're solving a mystery, she said, her voice drifting back to us. But it's not a puzzle, Sherlock. It's a reflection. Holmes stiffened. A reflection? She turned her head slightly, offering one last cryptic smile. The more you uncover, the more you will see yourself. And the more you see, the more you will understand that you were never meant to know. With that, she stepped through the door. The room fell silent once again, and I felt the weight of her words settle in the pit of my stomach. Holmes did not speak. He simply stood there, staring at the door she had passed through. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he exhaled, his gaze focused on the book in his hand. This is no longer just a case, Watson. I hesitated. Then what is it? He turned to me, his expression unreadable. It is a truth we were never meant to uncover. I took a step forward, mind still reeling. Holmes, I don't understand. If the Lazarus Gate is not a place, not a time, then what is it? What does it want from us? Holmes closed his eyes for a moment, as though weighing the enormity of what had just unfolded. When a person disappears from history, Watson, it's not just that their name is erased. It is that they are never remembered. And if we are chasing after the truth of what is missing, we must first confront the truth of who we are. I felt a chill. Who we are! Holmes opened his eyes, fixing me with a gaze so sharp it cut through the fog of my confusion. Yes, Watson, who we are. Because the gate we seek may not be a place we enter, but a place we become. The words hit me with the force of a revelation I couldn't quite grasp, and yet something inside me stirred. An understanding, something that felt both profound and terrifying. Before I could respond, Holmes was already moving toward the door. "Come," he said, his voice low but determined. "There is no time left to waste." As we stepped into the night, the fog rolling thick around us, I knew one thing for certain. This was no longer just about finding a missing man. This was about discovering something far worse. Chapter 16. Bureau, Mirror of the Past. We moved through the dark streets of London with a sense of urgency, though neither of us spoke. The weight of the woman's words still clung to me, heavy and unrelenting, like a fog that refused to lift. Holmes seemed unaffected by it all, his mind always operating at a level beyond the ordinary, his focus unwavering. I, on the other hand, couldn't help but feel the edges of my reality beginning to unravel. Every piece of the puzzle we had so carefully assembled now seemed to be slipping through my fingers. "Holmes," I said quietly, breaking the silence, "what did she mean by the reflection? What does it have to do with the Lazarus Gate?" Holmes didn't turn to face me, his pace never faltering as he walked through the thickening fog. "It is exactly as she said. The more you uncover, the more you will see yourself. The gate isn't just about memory, Watson. It's about identity." "Identity?" He nodded, his voice steady but carrying an edge I hadn't heard before. "You see, Watson, the gate is not merely a mechanism for altering history. It alters who we are. It's not just about forgetting the past. It's about replacing it." I felt a chill grip my spine as his words settled in. "You mean they could replace our entire lives? Our very selves?" Holmes's expression remained unreadable. "Yes, Watson, and the only way to stop them is to remember who we are, even when the world refuses to acknowledge it." We reached an alleyway where the fog was so thick it swallowed us whole, the gaslights barely visible through the mist. Holmes paused, his sharp gaze scanning the surroundings, and then he motioned for me to follow him. "This way," he said, pushing through the alley toward a nondescript door at the far end. It was barely visible, hidden in the shadows, but Holmes seemed to know exactly where it was. The door creaked open as we stepped inside, the faint sound of a bell jingling in the distance. We entered a dimly lit room, filled with shelves of dust-covered books and old records. The air was thick, with the scent of aged paper, the kind of place you wouldn't find on any tourist's map. "This is it," Holmes said, his voice low. "The next piece of the puzzle lies here. A ledger. The ledger of the Lazarus Gate." I couldn't see how a dusty old library could hold the key to everything we had been searching for. But Holmes's confidence was infectious, and so I followed, him deeper into the room. Holmes moved swiftly between the rows of shelves, his fingers tracing the spines of books with practiced ease. Finally, he stopped in front of a large ancient tome. The leather cover was worn, its edges frayed, but the title was still legible. The Records of the Forgotten. "This," Holmes said, lifting the book from its resting place, "is the one." I watched as he flipped the cover open, revealing pages of dense, handwritten text. The ink was faint in places, but there was a rhythm to the writing, an almost obsessive precision that filled each line. Holmes began reading aloud, his voice steady, though the words he spoke sent a ripple of unease through me. "The Lazarus Gate is not a door to be opened, but a truth to be uncovered. Those who seek it must pay the price of knowledge. The cost is their name, their identity. Their very being is rewritten. The past is erased, and they become something else." I swallowed hard. "Holmes, this is madness. Who wrote this?" Holmes's eyes remained fixed on the page. "Someone who understands the cost. Someone who has paid it before." "Paid it?" I repeated, my mind struggling to keep pace. "You mean someone who's already gone through with this? Someone who has been, what, erased?" He nodded slowly. "Yes, Watson. They do not simply forget you. They make sure you never existed. No records, no memories, nothing. You are swallowed by the gate. But why?" "Because the gate serves a purpose. A very specific purpose. And if we do not find a way to stop it, we will be next." Holmes turned the page, revealing another set of instructions. This one was written in a hand I had never seen before, the ink thick and deliberate, almost like the writer knew their time was running out. "The truth is always hidden. Those who control the gate are not bound by time, but by the fabric of reality itself. To stop them, you must break the cycle. Find the key, the reflection, and you will unlock what has been lost. But be warned, you cannot undo the gate without losing yourself." I felt my head spinning. The reflection? What does that mean? Holmes stared at the page for a long moment, then closed the book with a soft thud. "It means we have to look at ourselves, Watson, to see beyond the veil of what we think we know, to confront who we were and who we were never meant to be." His voice was uncharacteristically grim, the weight of his words sinking in. The world we had been chasing, this gate, this reality-bending conspiracy, was not just about uncovering hidden truths. It was about understanding that everything we thought we knew was a lie. I opened my mouth to ask more, but Holmes held up his hand. "We are being watched, Watson," he said softly, "and time is running out." I felt a deep, primal fear settle in the pit of my stomach. We left the library quickly, Holmes's steps measured but swift. The cold London air hit me like a slap in the face, but I could not shake the sense of foreboding that had taken root in my chest. As we walked toward the nearest cab, Holmes's words kept echoing in my mind, to confront who we were, and who we were never meant to be. The cab pulled away, the fog swallowing the city around us. Holmes was silent, his mind clearly elsewhere, and I could not help but wonder, what was he seeing? What truth had he already uncovered? Finally he turned to me. "You have a choice, Watson." I raised an eyebrow. "A choice? Yes, you can choose to forget. To go back to the life you knew before this all started." I shook my head. "I can't forget this, Holmes. I need to understand what's happening." He met my gaze, his eyes dark and heavy. "And so you will, Watson. But the price is steep. I didn't ask what the price would be, because deep down I already knew we were not just fighting for truth. We were fighting for our very souls." Chapter 17. The Path We Chose. The cab rattled through the streets, the fog swallowing the city in its thick, wet embrace. London, a city of shadows, now felt more oppressive than ever. Each corner we turned seemed to blur into the next, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being pulled towards something inevitable, something we couldn't control. Holmes sat beside me, his face an unreadable mask as his thoughts churned. The book, The Records of the Forgotten, was still tucked safely beneath his coat, its pages heavy with secrets. It was clear now. This was no longer just a case to be solved. It was a descent into a world where truth itself was malleable, where even the very fabric of memory could be altered. And yet we pressed forward. "Holmes," I said quietly, breaking the silence, "what did you mean by the reflection? You said we had to confront who we were. What does that even mean?" Holmes didn't immediately respond. He stared out the window, his sharp gaze focused on nothing in particular, lost in thought. "The reflection," he finally muttered, his voice distant, as though he were speaking to himself more than to me. "It's what we see when we look back, Watson. The truth about ourselves, stripped of the lies we tell ourselves. We can deceive others, we can deceive the world, but we cannot deceive the mirror." I frowned, trying to wrap my mind around his words. "So you think the key to this whole thing is us?" Holmes's eyes flicked to mine, and for the first time I saw a glimmer of something. Vulnerability, but it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. "No, Watson," he replied, his voice hardening again. "The key is in what we become. The mirror will show us the truth, but it will also reveal what we are willing to sacrifice to remain who we are. We have to decide, Watson." I didn't fully understand, but I knew better than to press him further. Holmes was in his element, now, navigating the treacherous waters of the unknown, following the thread of logic through a maze of contradictions. Whatever lay ahead, I knew it would be something beyond anything either of us could anticipate. The cab pulled to a stop in front of a building I hadn't seen before. A stone structure nestled deep in the heart of London, hidden from the usual gaze of passers-by. Its architecture was imposing, its windows darkened, and the heavy iron gate at its entrance gave it the feel of a place not meant to be found. I looked at Holmes. "Is this it?" He nodded, his eyes fixed on the building. "Yes, Watson. This is where it begins." We stepped out of the cab and walked toward the gate. It was locked, but Holmes didn't hesitate. His fingers moved with practiced precision, pulling out a small tool from his coat pocket. Within moments the lock clicked open, and the gate creaked as it swung inward. "Holmes," I said, glancing around uneasily, "are we sure about this?" Holmes didn't look at me as he walked through the gate, his pace steady. "The only way to stop the erasure is to face it, Watson, and we will, together." The inside of the building was just as oppressive as the exterior. A long, dark hallway stretched before us, lit only by flickering lamps that seemed to glow with an unnatural light. The air was thick, like the building had been sealed for years, untouched by the world outside. We moved cautiously through the hallway, the floorboards creaking under our weight. I felt an odd sensation, like we were being watched, observed, but there was no one here. Holmes stopped in front of a door at the end of the hall. The plaque beside it was scratched and worn, its lettering illegible. Without a word, he pushed the door open. Inside, the room was filled with rows upon rows of bookshelves. But these weren't ordinary books. These were leather-bound volumes, their spines etched with strange symbols that seemed to shift as I looked at them. I stepped inside, looking around. "What is this place, Holmes?" He moved toward one of the bookshelves, running his fingers over the dust-covered spines. "These are the records, the ones they've been erasing. This is the place of forgotten names." I felt a shiver run through me. "You mean these are the names of people who have been erased from history?" Holmes nodded slowly, his eyes scanning the room with an intensity that left no detail unnoticed. "Yes, people like Henry Acton, people like us," I swallowed. "And how do we stop it?" Holmes's gaze flicked to me, his expression hardening. "We stop it by understanding who is behind it all, Watson, and by taking back what was stolen." Holmes stopped in front of one particular shelf, his hand hovering just above, a book that seemed to call out to him. He pulled it free, revealing its cover, a plain leather-bound volume with no markings. "This is it," he said quietly. I watched as Holmes carefully opened the book, his eyes scanning the pages with growing intensity. The words seemed to shimmer before his eyes, and I could feel the tension building in the air. The truth is not a single moment, but a collection of moments strung together. Each memory, each name, each life has a place. But what happens when those places are torn away? Holmes read the words aloud, his voice low but clear. The room seemed to shift around us, as if the very air was vibrating with the force of the revelation. "The mirror is more than just a reflection of what is," Holmes murmured. "It is a reflection of what could have been." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. "What are you saying?" Holmes closed the book slowly, his eyes still fixed on the pages. "The mirror will show us who we truly are, Watson, but it will also show us who we were meant to be. The question is, will we accept it?" I stared at him, the weight of his words sinking in. This was no longer just a mystery to solve. It was a battle for our very identities. Holmes turned to face me, his gaze unwavering. "Whatever happens next, Watson, we cannot let them erase us." I nodded, a sense of resolve settling over me. We were in this together, for better or worse. "Let's finish this," I said, my voice steady. Holmes smiled, a rare but knowing smile. "That's the spirit, Watson." With that, we moved toward the door at the far end of the room, where the next chapter of this twisted journey awaited us. Chapter 18. The Edge of the Abyss. The door before us loomed like a final threshold. The weight of the moment hung thick in the air as Holmes stood motionless, his hand resting on the knob, his gaze fixed ahead. I could feel the tension in the air, a palpable force pressing down on us. We had come this far, uncovered so many secrets, and yet the true nature of what we faced still eluded us. What was the Lazarus Gate? What was the ultimate price of knowledge? Holmes turned to me, his eyes sharp and unblinking. "Are you ready for this, Watson?" I met his gaze, the uncertainty swirling in my chest. "Ready for what?" He gave a slight nod. "For the truth." With that, he pushed the door open, and we stepped into the next room. The room was unlike any we had encountered before. It was vast, yet felt contained, as though the very space around us was watching us. The walls were lined with mirrors, each one framed in ornate gold. The reflections they cast were distorted, twisted, and for a moment I thought I saw flashes of other people, strangers, figures I didn't recognize. The floor was smooth, polished stone, and the air was heavy with the scent of old wood and dust, as if this place had been untouched for years. Holmes stepped forward, his eyes scanning the room with a mixture of caution and determination. "This is it," he muttered. "The mirror is the key." I turned to him, confused. "What do you mean, the mirror?" Holmes gestured to the walls around us. "These mirrors don't just reflect, Watson. They distort. They show us not what is, but what could have been. What we could have been. The Lazarus Gate is a doorway to the past, our past." I swallowed, my mind racing. "You mean these mirrors show us alternate realities?" Holmes gave a sharp nod. "Exactly. The reflections are more than just images. They are what we could have become if the gate had never been opened." I stepped closer to one of the mirrors, my own reflection staring back at me, except it wasn't quite me. The face was familiar, but there was something off. The man in the reflection had eyes that seemed too distant, too cold. "What is this place, Holmes?" I asked again, my voice barely a whisper. Holmes did not respond immediately. He stood before one of the mirrors, his eyes locked onto the image of himself. I could see the deep lines of concentration on his face, the faintest flicker of recognition. Then he spoke softly, almost to himself. "This is the moment where everything changes. Watson, this is where we face the choice we've been running from." I glanced back at the mirrors. The reflections weren't static. They shifted subtly, like the image was trying to break free, as if something or someone was manipulating the very fabric of reality. I turned to Holmes, his focus unwavering. "You said we have a choice," I said, feeling the weight of his words pressing down on me. "What kind of choice?" Holmes's voice was low, almost a murmur. "To accept what we were meant to be, or to fight it. To remember who we are, or forget." The words hung in the air, heavy and ominous. I could feel the floor beneath me shift, the weight of the room pressing in. In the mirror, the other me was smiling, a slow, unsettling smile. My heart raced in my chest. "Holmes, these reflections, what do they mean for us?" He turned toward me, his eyes dark and resolute. "They mean we are on the verge of something irreversible. If we step into the reflection, we will cross over. We will become part of the story we were never meant to know." "Then we must not cross over," I said firmly, my voice steady despite the doubt creeping into my thoughts. "We must stop this." Holmes's expression softened, but his eyes never left the mirror. "We have already crossed, Watson. We've crossed the threshold, and now there is no going back." I felt the room shift around us, the reflections starting to blur, warping the very fabric of the space we were standing in. Suddenly, The mirrors began to pulse with light, shifting, flickering, like the pages of an ancient book being turned too quickly. The reflections warped even more, and for a brief moment I saw other versions of myself, some younger, some older, all fading in and out of existence. The world around me seemed to bend, as if time itself were unravelling. "What is happening?" I whispered, stepping back. Holmes didn't flinch. "The gate is opening. We've reached the edge of the abyss." I turned toward him, fear rising in my chest. "What abyss?" He didn't answer immediately, his gaze still fixed on the mirrors. "The abyss between what is and what could be, Watson. The moment where history ends and begins again." I felt the walls closing in, the room growing smaller. "Holmes, we have to stop this." He shook his head. "It's too late for that." Just as the light from the mirrors intensified, there was a sharp crash, and the air was filled with a deep, resonating hum. The ground beneath us trembled, and I caught sight of a shadow moving in the corner of the room. Someone was coming. I stepped back, reaching for my revolver, but Holmes's hand stopped me. His expression was cold, resolute. "Do not fire, Watson. Not yet." From the shadows, a figure emerged, tall, wearing a cloak that seemed to absorb the light around it. The figure's face was obscured, but the aura of power emanated from them, and I could feel the weight of their presence even before they spoke. "You've come so far, Sherlock Holmes," the figure said, their voice smooth and commanding. "But you've reached the point of no return." Holmes stood his ground, his gaze unwavering. "I've been here before, haven't I? This moment, this choice." The figure tilted its head slightly. "Yes, you have. And now you must choose. What will you become?" Holmes's eyes flickered. "I will become what I was always meant to be. The man who uncovers the truth." The figure's lips twisted into a smile. "Then you understand the cost, Sherlock Holmes. The price of truth." For the first time, I saw Holmes hesitate. "Remember who you are, Watson." His voice broke through the tension like a sudden clarity. He was no longer asking. He was commanding. Chapter 19. The Final Reckoning. The figure before us remained motionless, its presence pressing down like a storm cloud, darkening the very air around us. Its face still obscured by shadows, but there was something in its posture, in the way it stood, that made it clear this was the point of no return. Holmes's voice broke through the tension. "You think you have control over this, but you do not." He stepped forward, his eyes locked onto the figure with an intensity that seemed to pierce the very fabric of reality itself. The figure did not move. It only tilted its head, acknowledging Holmes's defiance with a subtle shift. "Control?" It echoed softly. "This is not about control, Sherlock. This is about fate. The truth is not something you can choose, not something you can alter. It is woven into the fabric of time itself, and now you must accept what you are." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on me. My mind was still reeling from everything we had uncovered, but there was a finality in the air now. No more running, no more evasions. We were at the precipice of understanding the full scope of the Lazarus Gate. "What am I?" Holmes asked, his voice steady, but with a quiet determination. "What is the truth that you claim I cannot change?" The figure's silence stretched between us thick as a fog, and for a moment I thought it might not answer. But then it spoke again, its voice as cold as stone. "You are a reflection, Sherlock Holmes, a piece of the puzzle that was never meant to be." I stiffened. A reflection? Holmes's gaze didn't leave the figure. "So, you are saying—" "I am saying," the figure interrupted, "that you were never meant to be here. You were never meant to unravel the secrets of the Lazarus Gate. You were never meant to uncover the truth." The room seemed to shift. As the figure spoke, the mirrors around us distorting further, warping and shattering with an eerie sound, like the breaking of glass but somehow more profound, as if the very fabric of reality was cracking apart. Holmes didn't flinch. He continued to stand his ground, his jaw set, his resolve unwavering. I could see the gears turning behind his eyes, his mind working through this final confrontation with the same sharpness that had guided him through every case before. "You are wrong," Holmes said, his voice firm. "I was meant to uncover the truth. I will not accept that this is my end, that I am simply a reflection, a shadow of something else. I will expose the truth, no matter the cost." The figure's smile widened, though it was a smile devoid of warmth. "You cannot expose what is not meant to be known. What is hidden, Holmes, is hidden for a reason, and the truth you seek will be the very thing that destroys you." Holmes's gaze was unshakable. "Then I will destroy what destroys me first." With those words, the air in the room seemed to crack. The very reality around us, bending, stretching. For a moment the mirrors on the walls flared to life, showing shifting images, memories of past selves, of moments that never truly happened, but that felt familiar. I saw myself, standing in a hospital room. I saw Holmes, but his face was different. Younger, older, constantly changing. I saw him standing at a crossroads, a place where everything could change. And in the reflection, I saw the future, the choices yet to come. But it wasn't just the mirrors. The world around us began to tremble. The walls vibrated, the light dimming, as if the very house was coming apart at the seams. "Holmes," I said, my voice shaky, "what is happening?" Holmes turned to face me, his expression grave but determined. "This is it, Watson. The moment we have both been running from. The moment of truth. We are no longer just observers. We are part of the truth. And now we must choose." I felt the weight of his words. We must choose. The stakes had never been clearer, the consequences never so high. The reflections in the mirrors were not simply images, they were choices. "What do you mean, choose?" I asked, my voice tense. Holmes's eyes never left the swirling chaos around us. "We have come this far because we have seen the truth. But we now stand at the crossroads of history itself. We can turn back and let the world forget us, or we can move forward and risk becoming something we cannot return from." I stepped back, confusion and fear welling inside me. "Holmes, what are you saying?" He reached for the book, the same one that had carried us this far. "We are not just solving a mystery, Watson. We are rewriting it. The Lazarus Gate gives us a choice, to accept the world as it is, or to challenge everything we've ever known." I stood still for a moment, absorbing the weight of his words. This wasn't just about uncovering a conspiracy or stopping a dangerous force. This was about who we were, who we had become, and who we might still be. And as I stood there, I realized the choice was mine too. We had both come this far, but this decision, this final step, would define us forever. The air grew colder still, the mirrors around us shifting, flickering with images I couldn't understand. I saw flashes of people I had never met, places I had never been. But one thing remained constant, the figure in the mirror. It was me, and yet it was not. Holmes took a step forward, his hand holding the book tightly, as if the very act of reading it would reveal everything we needed to know. If we make the wrong choice, he said, we risk becoming part of the lie, a reflection that will be erased, forgotten, never to be remembered again. I stepped beside him, my heart pounding in my chest. Then we have to be sure, Holmes. We must choose what we are willing to lose to uncover the truth. Holmes nodded, his eyes locked onto mine. And that is the greatest choice of all, Watson, to remember. And with those words, he closed the book. The final decision had been made. Chapter 20. The final revelation. The room fell deathly still. The mirrors, once swirling with chaotic images, were now eerily calm, each one reflecting our present, but not the world we had come to understand. The air hung heavy, as though the very atmosphere was waiting for something, some final decision to be made. Holmes stood at the centre of it all, the book now closed tightly in his hands, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. I stood beside him, watching the world around us hold its breath, unsure of what would happen next. "What happens now?" I asked, the uncertainty creeping into my voice despite my best efforts to remain composed. Holmes did not answer immediately. His eyes were fixed on the book, but his mind was somewhere far beyond it, unravelling the implications of our choice. Finally, after a long, tense silence, he spoke. "The truth," he said, his voice steady but laden with the gravity of the situation, "is not just something we uncover. It is something we become." I frowned, unsure of what he meant. "Become? Holmes, what do you mean?" He turned toward me, his expression grim but resolute. "We have crossed the point of no return, Watson. The Lazarus Gate is not a mere doorway to knowledge. It is a crossroads where history and reality merge, and we are no longer just observers. We are part of the story." I felt my heart race, a sense of dread settling in. So we are part of the lie, part of the very thing we've been trying to uncover. Holmes nodded slowly. "Yes, but we have a choice. We can either accept the new reality and become part of the world they've rewritten, or we can continue to fight, knowing that in doing so, we may erase ourselves completely." I looked at him, trying to process the magnitude of what he was saying. We weren't just trying to solve a case anymore. We were deciding the very fate of our identities. The Lazarus Gate was no longer a mystery to be unravelled. It was a force, a decision we had to make with no guarantee of return. "Holmes," I said slowly, "are you saying we can choose to leave this behind, to forget it all? That we could go back to the lives we had before all of this?" His eyes softened, a fleeting moment of vulnerability passing through them. "It's possible, Watson, but at what cost? The truth, once seen, cannot be unseen. The choices we make here will shape everything that comes after. I felt the weight of his words sink in. Could we walk away from it all? Could we accept the illusion of a life untainted by this discovery? Or was the price of such peace too high? Holmes, as always, was calm, but there was something in the way he held himself that told me he had already made up his mind. He turned to me, his voice low but unwavering. "I cannot walk away, Watson. I will not accept a life that isn't mine." The room around us seemed to stretch, as though the very walls were drawing closer with each passing moment. The mirrors, once an eerie reflection of possible futures, now seemed like a judgment, a test of who we truly were. I stared into one of them, and for a fleeting moment I saw a version of myself I didn't recognize. He was older, harder, his face set in a permanent expression of regret. I felt my chest tighten, and I looked away. The reflections were no longer just reflections. They were choices. Choices of who we could be and who we had to leave behind. "Cannot let them erase us, Watson," Holmes said, his voice cutting through the haze of doubt in my mind. "We will remember, no matter the cost." I turned toward him, the weight of his resolve pulling me in. What if we don't survive this? What if the cost is more than just our memories? What if— He held up a hand to silence me. "It will be more than memories, but it will also be us. We will either choose to face the truth, or we will lose ourselves entirely. No more running, Watson. We must accept that what is lost can never be fully regained." The finality of his words hung in the air. It wasn't just about uncovering the truth anymore. It was about becoming it, accepting that the world we thought we knew was just a mirror, a shadow of what was meant to be, and now we had the power to shape it. Holmes stepped forward, holding the book in his hands like a key, the pages glowing faintly in the dim light. He placed it on a pedestal in the center of the room, and as he did, the mirrors around us began to tremble. I could feel the world shifting. The air was thick, charged with energy, as though the very fabric of reality was being pulled in every direction. I could almost hear the echoes of past versions of myself, each one calling out, trying to pull me in different directions, each reflection, each possibility, competing for dominance. Holmes stood there, unflinching, staring down the invisible force that sought to erase him. I could feel his resolve, his unwavering determination to stay true to who he was, despite the chaos around us. And in that moment, I understood. The only way out of this was to embrace the truth, no matter what it meant for us. The air around us began to crackle, the mirrors flashing with light, as though they were about to explode. I reached out to Holmes, but he stepped forward, closing his eyes for a brief moment before looking back at me. "Are you ready, Watson?" he asked, his voice steady, but laced with the weight of what we were about to do. I hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "Yes, we can't run anymore. We face this together." Holmes reached for the book again, his fingers brushing the pages. "Then let's end this. Let's choose who we will be." He opened the book, and the world around us shifted. In the next instant, the mirrors shattered, splintering, collapsing into 1,000 shards that dissolved into the air. The world around us spun, warped, and for one moment I felt the pull of something greater than myself, something that threatened to drag me into the unknown. But then it stopped. We were standing in the same room, but everything had changed. The air felt different, as though we had stepped into a world where the rules of time and memory no longer applied. The mirrors were gone, the reflections were no more, and in their place was only truth, staring us down. Holmes and Watson stand in the room where the mirrors shattered, the air still crackling with residual energy. The book lies open on the pedestal, its pages glowing faintly. Holmes, ever the pragmatist, begins to piece together the final clues. Holmes deduces that the Lazarus Gate is not a physical place, but a metaphysical construct, a mechanism created by an ancient society to control the flow of history. It erases individuals who threaten the balance of reality, rewriting their existence to maintain order. The gate is powered by the collective memories of those it has erased, creating a self-sustaining loop. Holmes, the Lazarus Gate is not a door, Watson. It is a mirror, a reflection of humanity's fear of chaos. It consumes those who seek to disrupt the natural order, but in doing so, it perpetuates its own existence. The cloaked figure and the enigmatic woman are revealed to be former guardians of the gate, individuals who were once erased but managed to retain fragments of their memories. They now serve as intermediaries, warning those who come too close to the truth. Woman, we were like you once, Sherlock. We sought the truth, and it consumed us. Now we exist only to ensure that others do not suffer the same fate. Holmes discovers that his name appears in the ledger because he was once erased by the gate. His entire existence, his memories, his cases, even his partnership with Watson, was reconstructed by the gate to serve its purpose. This revelation shakes him to his core, but also strengthens his resolve. Holmes, I am a reflection, Watson, a construct of the gate. But if I am a lie, then I will use that lie to uncover the truth. Holmes and Watson are presented with a choice. They can either walk away and allow the gate to continue its work, preserving the world as it is, or they can destroy the gate, risking the collapse of reality itself. Holmes, true to his character, chooses the latter. Holmes, if the price of truth is the destruction of this false reality, then so be it. I would rather face oblivion than live a lie. Using the book as a key, Holmes and Watson trigger the gate's self-destruction. The room begins to collapse, the mirrors shattering one by one as the gate disintegrates. The erased memories of countless individuals flood back into the world, including those of Henry Acton. Watson, Holmes, what have we done? Holmes, we have set the world free, Watson. The truth may be chaotic, but it is ours. Holmes and Watson emerge from the collapsing building, the fog lifting to reveal a London that feels both familiar and strange. The erased individuals begin to reappear, their memories restored. Henry Acton is among them, alive and whole. Acton, you did it, Holmes. You broke the cycle. Holmes, no, Acton. We all did. The truth belongs to everyone. In the final scene, Holmes stands by the fireplace at 221B Baker Street, staring into the flames. Watson joins him, a glass of brandy in hand. Watson, do you ever wonder if we made the right choice? Holmes. The right choice, Watson, is the one we can live with. And I, for one, cannot live in a world where truth is sacrificed for order. The ear camera pans out, showing the bustling streets of London, alive with the restored memories of its people. The story ends on a hopeful note, with Holmes and Watson ready to face whatever mysteries the new world holds.